You there, frustrated data analyst who keeps building dashboards nobody uses. This problem isn't your technical skills. It's likely that you're choosing the wrong communication vehicle for your insights. Today, that changes. I'm going to show you exactly how to diagnose whether a dashboard or data story will be more effective for your specific situation. No more guessing, no more wasted effort. Just a clear framework for making this critical decision every time a new data project lands on your desk. The $1 million dashboard no one used. Let me tell you about a Fortune 500 company that spent $1.2 million on a dashboard system their executives opened exactly twice. Yes, you heard that right. Twice. Not twice a day, not twice a week. Twice ever. This wasn't some hastily assembled spreadsheet or basic visualization tool. This was a state-of-the-art sales performance dashboard developed by a team of highly skilled data scientists and engineers. The company had identified a critical need to track sales performance across regions and product lines in real time. Leadership wanted better visibility into market trends, customer behavior patterns, and sales team effectiveness. The data team approached this project with enthusiasm and meticulous attention to detail. For 6 months, a dedicated team of 5 data engineers, 3 data scientists, and 2 UX designers worked on creating what they believed would be the perfect solution. The project consumed over 3,200 person-hours in development time alone, not counting the planning phase and stakeholder meetings. They built an architectural marvel of data integration. The system pulled from 17 different data sources across the organization, including their CRM system, ERP, website analytics, and even social media sentiment analysis. Custom ETL pipelines were developed to ensure data flowed seamlessly into a centralized data warehouse. The team implemented rigorous data quality checks and automated validation procedures to maintain data integrity. The front-end dashboard itself was equally impressive. The interface featured an elegant, modern design with intuitive navigation and responsive layouts that worked across devices. The team was particularly proud of the sophisticated visualizations they'd created, heat maps showing regional performance, waterfall charts displaying sales funnels, and predictive models forecasting future revenue streams. The dashboard offered real-time data updates, refreshing every 15 minutes to provide the most current information possible. Executives could drill down from high-level KPIs to granular details in just a few clicks. Want to know why sales were dropping in the Midwest region? Click. Need to understand which products were underperforming in the Asian market? Click. The system could slice and dice the data across any dimension. Customizable views allowed each executive to configure their own personalized dashboard, focusing on their specific areas of responsibility. The CFO could prioritize financial metrics, while the CMO could emphasize marketing performance indicators. The system even remembered each user's preferences and would restore their customized view upon login. Advanced features included anomaly detection algorithms that would flag unusual patterns worthy of attention, trend analysis capabilities that could identify emerging shifts in the market, and scenario modeling tools that allowed executives to test different business assumptions. The dashboard even had built-in notification capabilities that could alert executives to significant changes or concerning trends. The launch day arrived with great fanfare. The data team prepared an extensive training session for the executive team, complete with personalized walkthroughs and reference materials. They demonstrated all the powerful features, showing how the dashboard could answer virtually any question about sales performance. The executives nodded appreciatively, asked a few questions, and thanked the team for their hard work. And then, nothing. The usage statistics told a shocking story. In the first week after launch, only 3 executives logged in at all. By the end of the month, total login count across the entire executive team was 7. After 3 months, the dashboard had been accessed a grand total of 9 times. And within 6 months, the system that had cost $1.2 million to build was effectively abandoned, having been opened just twice in the previous quarter. The data team was baffled. How could their masterpiece, this technological marvel that represented thousands of hours of expert work, be so thoroughly ignored? They had built exactly what was requested: a comprehensive, powerful, flexible dashboard for monitoring sales performance. The system worked flawlessly from a technical perspective. The data was accurate and up-to-date. The interface was intuitive and user-friendly. What had gone wrong? The data science team decided to investigate. They conducted interviews with the executives who were supposed to be using the dashboard. What they discovered was eye-opening. The executives weren't avoiding the dashboard because of any technical shortcomings or usability issues. They were avoiding it because it simply didn't fit into their decision-making process. When asked about how they prefer to consume information, executives consistently mentioned that they valued context, narrative, and clear recommendations. One executive stated, "I don't have time to explore data, no matter how well organized it is. I need someone to tell me what's important and why." Another executive revealed, "When I open a dashboard, I'm immediately confronted with dozens of metrics. How do I know which ones deserve my attention? What's the story here?" A third was even more direct. "I'd rather have a one-page summary with 3 bullet points than access to all the data in the world." The dashboard had failed to account for how executives actually make decisions in their limited time. These leaders weren't looking for a tool to explore data. They wanted insights delivered in a format that matched their rapid decision-making needs. They didn't want to interpret visualizations. They wanted clear business implications and recommendations. What became clear through these interviews was that the data team had made a fundamental error. They had never actually asked the executives about their specific needs. Instead, they had made assumptions based on what they thought would be useful, building features they considered valuable rather than understanding what would truly serve their audience. The data team had fallen into a common trap. When someone says, "I need a dashboard," the natural response for analysts is to start thinking about metrics, visualizations, and features. But the more important question is, what decisions are you trying to make with this information, and how do you prefer to make those decisions? This disconnect reveals a crucial insight about data communication. Technical excellence and comprehensive functionality do not guarantee adoption or impact. The most sophisticated dashboard in the world will fail if it doesn't align with how the intended audience prefers to consume information and make decisions. In follow-up interviews, the data team discovered something even more revealing. Most of the executives had requested a dashboard without fully understanding their own needs. They had asked for a dashboard because that seemed like the right thing to request, not because it was the right solution for their actual requirements. The fundamental issue wasn't the quality of the dashboard itself, but choosing the wrong communication vehicle for the audience and context. The executives didn't need a self-service exploration tool. They needed curated insights delivered in a format that respected their time constraints and decision-making preferences. This realization led to a complete rethinking of how the data team approached their role. Instead of focusing exclusively on building tools for self-service analysis, they began to see themselves as translators and storytellers, professionals who could bridge the gap between raw data and business decisions. The aftermath of this expensive lesson wasn't all negative. The data infrastructure and pipelines built for the dashboard proved valuable for other purposes. The data warehouse became an essential asset for the organization, and most importantly, the data team learned a crucial lesson about effective communication that would transform their approach to future projects. When they later presented this case study at an industry conference, other data professionals shared similar experiences. The pattern was common across industries. Technically excellent dashboards sitting unused while decision-makers continued to ask for information in emails, presentations, and meetings. This story illustrates a broader truth about data communication. The medium matters as much as the message. Even the most valuable insights will go unused if they're not delivered in a format that matches how the intended audience actually consumes information and makes decisions. Why executives ignore most dashboards. While our data teams obsess over pixel-perfect visualizations and real-time updates, executives are drowning in cognitive overload. The statistic that 78% of executive dashboards are viewed less than once per month isn't just a random data point. It's a symptom of a fundamental disconnect in how we communicate with decision-makers. Behind these striking numbers lies a growing body of research on why executive dashboards so frequently fail to gain traction. The root cause isn't technical inadequacy or even design flaws, but rather a profound mismatch between how information is presented and how executive decisions are actually made. Consider what happens in an executive's typical day. They move from meeting to meeting, making consequential decisions in compressed time frames between emails, calls, and presentations. The mental bandwidth available for deep data exploration simply doesn't exist in this environment. Even when executives do allocate time to examine dashboards, The cognitive load required to interpret multiple visualizations, understand relationships between metrics, and extract meaningful insights creates a significant barrier. This cognitive burden manifests in what researchers call analysis paralysis. When faced with a dashboard containing dozens of metrics, executives must determine which indicators are most relevant, how they relate to each other, and what actions they suggest. This mental processing taxes precisely the executive functions of the brain that are already heavily utilized throughout their day. The challenge extends beyond just the volume of information. Dashboards excel at answering what questions. What were our sales this quarter? What regions are underperforming? What products have the highest margins? But they frequently fail to address the more critical why and so what questions that drive executive decision-making. Why are those regions underperforming? So what should we do about declining margins in a particular product line? This limitation creates a gap between data presentation and decision utility. Executives don't just need to see that numbers are down, they need to understand why they're down and what options exist for addressing the situation. Without this context, the dashboard becomes merely an informational tool rather than a decision support system. The executive decision-making process itself further complicates dashboard adoption. Research into how C-suite leaders actually make decisions reveals a process that's far less data-driven and far more narrative-based than many analytics professionals assume. Executives typically rely on a combination of experience, pattern recognition, social proof, what peers are doing, and compelling narratives that connect data to business outcomes. In one particularly revealing study, when executives were asked to recall how they made their most important recent decisions, very few described a process of data exploration. Instead, they described receiving synthesized insights within a strategic narrative that clearly outlined implications and options. This preference for narrative isn't a deficiency, it's an adaptation to the high-pressure, high-stakes nature of executive decision-making, where context and implications often matter more than raw data. The attention economy presents another formidable barrier to dashboard adoption. An executive's attention is perhaps their scarcest resource, with countless internal and external demands competing for their focus. A dashboard must compete with urgent emails, meeting preparations, stakeholder conversations, and strategic planning. In this competitive landscape for attention, dashboards that require a significant interpretation effort without clear payoff simply can't win the priority battle. One senior executive summed up this challenge succinctly when interviewed about dashboard usage. I have 15 minutes between meetings to make a decision that could impact millions in revenue. I don't have time to click through multiple dashboard views trying to piece together the story. Give me the headline, the evidence, and the options, then I can act. This sentiment reflects a broader truth about executive information consumption. Efficiency is paramount. A dashboard that requires executives to do their own analysis represents an inefficient transfer of cognitive labor from analysts who are paid to analyze data to executives who are paid to make decisions based on analysis. From a purely economic perspective, this is a suboptimal allocation of organizational resources. The visualization techniques commonly employed in dashboards can sometimes exacerbate these issues. While data professionals often value sophisticated visualizations that pack maximum information into minimum space, these same visualizations can create interpretation barriers for executives who may not be visualization experts. What seems like an elegant solution to a data scientist might represent a decoding challenge to an executive. Even the real-time nature of many dashboards, often considered a technical achievement, can work against executive adoption. The majority of strategic decisions don't require real-time data, but rather contextual understanding of trends and patterns over meaningful business cycles. The focus on real-time updates can create noise that obscures signal, making it harder to distinguish meaningful shifts from normal variation. These factors combine to create what we might call the dashboard paradox. The more comprehensive and sophisticated a dashboard becomes technically, the less likely it is to be used by the very decision makers it was designed to support. This isn't because executives don't value data. quite the opposite. It's because they value insights derived from data presented in a format that aligns with their decision-making processes. The solution to this paradox isn't abandoning dashboards entirely, but rather recognizing their appropriate role in the analytics ecosystem. Dashboards are excellent tools for operational monitoring and tactical decision-making, particularly for roles that involve direct management of processes and regular metric tracking. For strategic decision-making at the executive level, however, different approaches are needed. What executives require is context-rich insights that connect data to business outcomes through compelling narratives. They need analysis that moves beyond describing what happened to explaining why it happened and what options exist for response. Most importantly, they need this information delivered in a format that respects their cognitive constraints and decision-making processes. Successful organizations are increasingly adopting a more nuanced approach to analytics communication, reserving dashboards for specific use cases while employing data storytelling for executive communication. This approach recognizes that different audiences have different information needs and consumption patterns. The human brain processes narrative 22 times more efficiently than raw data, a fact that explains much about executive preference for story-based communication. Stories provide a cognitive framework that helps organize information, establish causality, and highlight implications. They turn abstract metrics into concrete business situations that demand response. Consider how this plays out in practice. When an executive receives a dashboard showing declining customer retention rates across multiple segments, they must independently analyze the patterns, determine which segments matter most, hypothesize potential causes, and formulate possible responses, all requiring significant cognitive effort. In contrast, when the same executive receives a data story that begins by highlighting the specific customer segments experiencing the most concerning retention declines, then explains the primary drivers behind those declines based on analysis, and concludes with recommended intervention options, the cognitive load shifts from interpretation to decision-making. The executive can focus their mental energy on evaluating options rather than deciphering data. This approach isn't about simplifying information, it's about transforming raw data into actionable insights through analysis and narrative structure. It's about recognizing that the value of data lies not in its presentation, but in its interpretation and application. For analytics professionals, this requires a shift in mindset from data delivery to insight communication. It means developing skills beyond technical data manipulation and visualization to include synthesis, narrative construction, and strategic framing. It means understanding not just how to answer questions with data, but how to ask the right questions in the first place. Organizations that make this shift see dramatic improvements in the impact of their analytics investments. When insights are delivered in formats that align with executive decision-making processes, those insights are more likely to drive action and create value. The same data that might be ignored in dashboard form can become the catalyst for major strategic initiatives when properly contextualized and communicated. The growing field of decision science offers additional perspectives on this challenge. Research into how humans actually make decisions, as opposed to how we think we make decisions, reveals that we are not the purely rational data processors we often imagine ourselves to be. Instead, our decisions are influenced by cognitive biases, emotional responses, and contextual factors. Effective data communication needs to account for these human elements rather than assuming a purely rational recipient. This means considering not just what information is presented, but how it's framed, what context surrounds it, and what emotional responses it might trigger. For instance, research shows that executives are more likely to act on insights that connect to established strategic priorities that include social proof from peer organizations and that present clear options rather than just problems. Building these elements into data communication significantly increases the likelihood of action. The 5-minute data story that drove immediate action. Research on executive behavior is compelling, but nothing demonstrates the power shift between dashboards and data stories like this real-world case. A struggling analytics team watched their carefully crafted dashboard go untouched for months, until they restructured the same information into a narrative that triggered an emergency meeting within 24 hours of presentation. After the dashboard debacle, the data team knew they needed a radical change in approach. They had spent months collecting and visualizing customer retention data, but those insights remained buried in the dashboard's many tabs and filters. The team decided to take a completely different tack. Rather than asking executives to explore the data, they would bring the critical findings directly to them in a focused, narrative format. The pivot wasn't just about changing the delivery method, it was about fundamentally rethinking how they communicated with decision makers. The team identified the most pressing business issue hidden within their dashboard, a concerning drop in customer retention rates within specific high-value segments. Instead of waiting for someone to discover this trend on their own, they crafted a concise 5-minute data story around it. What made this approach so different was its laser focus. Unlike the dashboard, which presented dozens of metrics simultaneously, the data story concentrated on just one critical business problem. The team began with a clear problem statement that immediately grabbed attention. Several premium customer segments were showing early warning signs of churn, potentially representing millions in lost annual revenue. The structure they followed was deliberately simple yet powerful. They started with context, reminding executives of the company's strategic goal to increase customer lifetime value. Then they introduced the conflict, data showing that retention rates among 3 premium customer segments had declined by 8% over the past quarter. This wasn't just presented as a cold statistic, but framed as a direct threat to the company's growth targets. Supporting evidence came next, but again, with a crucial difference from the dashboard approach. Rather than showing every data point, they selected the most compelling pieces of evidence that illustrated the problem's severity. They included visuals showing the customer journey points where engagement was dropping, comparison data from previous years to show this wasn't a normal seasonal fluctuation, and financial projections of the revenue impact if the trend continued. Perhaps most importantly, the story incorporated something dashboards typically lack: an emotional connection. The team included verbatim feedback from recently churned customers and highlighted specific accounts at risk of leaving. These weren't anonymous data points. They were real businesses with names and faces that executives recognized. This personalization transformed abstract metrics into a compelling narrative with genuine emotional weight. The story concluded with something else dashboards rarely provide: a specific call to action. The team didn't just present the problem. They offered 3 potential intervention strategies, each with estimated costs and projected impact. They made a clear recommendation for which approach would deliver the best ROI and outlined the resources needed to implement it successfully. The contrast in executive response couldn't have been more dramatic. The same retention data that had sat unnoticed in the dashboard for months suddenly became the catalyst for immediate action. Within 24 hours of presenting their data story, the executive team called an emergency meeting to address the retention issue. The urgency created by highlighting specific customer segments at risk proved impossible to ignore. What followed was equally remarkable. The decision-making process that typically dragged on for weeks or months was dramatically accelerated. The executive team not only approved one of the recommended retention initiatives, but allocated budget for it within just 7 days of the initial presentation. A problem that might have continued unaddressed for quarters was now being actively tackled. This case illustrates a fundamental truth about effective data communication. While dashboards excel at providing comprehensive monitoring capabilities, they often fail to create the urgency needed for immediate action. The transformation of raw metrics into a compelling business narrative with clear implications made all the difference. The data story succeeded because it addressed the critical questions executives need answered to make decisions. Where the dashboard showed what was happening, the story explained why it mattered and what should be done about it. This contextual framing eliminated the cognitive burden of interpretation that dashboards place on busy decision makers. Several specific elements made this approach successful. First, the clear problem statement created immediate focus. Second, the supporting evidence was selective and purposeful rather than exhaustive. Third, the emotional connection through specific customer examples made the stakes feel real and urgent. Finally, the explicit call to action eliminated ambiguity about next steps. Most importantly, the data story format aligned perfectly with how executives actually make decisions. It recognized that decision makers rarely have time to explore data deeply, but need insights delivered in a format that matches their rapid decision-making process. The narrative approach engaged both the analytical and emotional parts of the brain, creating both rational understanding and emotional urgency. This doesn't mean the team abandoned data rigor. Quite the opposite. The story was built on the same robust analysis and data integrity that powered their dashboard. The difference was in how they packaged and presented those insights to match the audience's needs and decision-making style. The effectiveness of the data story approach stemmed from its direct engagement with the why and so what questions that dashboards typically leave unanswered. By connecting the retention data to strategic priorities, providing context for interpretation, and offering clear next steps, the team eliminated the barriers that had previously prevented action. What's particularly noteworthy about this case is how the data team transformed their role in the organization. Rather than being seen as technical specialists who provided tools for others to use, they became strategic advisors, directly influencing business decisions. The 5-minute data story elevated their visibility and impact far more than months of dashboard development had achieved. The contrast between the dashboard and data story approaches reveals a critical insight about data communication. Effectiveness isn't about the quantity of information provided, but about creating the right conditions for decision-making. While the dashboard theoretically contained more comprehensive information, the focused data story delivered what executives actually needed to take action. This isn't to suggest that all dashboards should be abandoned. There are certainly situations where they remain valuable tools. However, this case demonstrates that when urgent action is required, when complex data needs interpretation, or when decisions involve significant resource allocation, data stories often prove far more effective than dashboards alone. The lessons from this case apply broadly across industries and organizational levels. The same principles that made this data story successful, clear problem statement, selective supporting evidence, emotional connection, and explicit call to action, can be applied to any situation where data needs to drive decisions. For data professionals, this example highlights the importance of developing storytelling skills alongside technical abilities. Understanding how to transform raw metrics into compelling narratives may be as valuable as knowing how to build sophisticated visualizations or perform complex analyses. The time investment difference is also worth noting. While the dashboard required months of development, the data story that drove action was created in just a few days. This efficiency multiplier represents a significant opportunity for data teams to increase their impact while potentially reducing their workload. What is a dashboard and when is it actually the right choice? Despite the efficiency gains we saw with data stories, dashboards still dominate the analytics landscape, accounting for over 70% of deliverables across organizations. This apparent contradiction exists because dashboards remain essential tools in specific scenarios that require ongoing measurement rather than one-time decisions, though most teams never learn which situations truly warrant this approach. So what exactly is a dashboard? At its core, a dashboard is a monitoring tool designed to provide a visual display of key metrics, enabling users to track performance and identify trends over time. Think of it as your car's instrument panel. You don't need to stare at your speedometer constantly, but it's there when you need to check how fast you're going or if something's wrong with your engine. The problem isn't that dashboards themselves are ineffective, it's that they're frequently deployed in situations where they're destined to fail. Many organizations invest significant resources creating elaborate dashboards for strategic decision-making when these tools are actually optimized for regular monitoring and standardized metric tracking. This fundamental misalignment explains why so many dashboard initiatives underperform. It's like using a thermometer to predict tomorrow's weather. It's the right tool for measuring current temperature, but completely inadequate for forecasting. Understanding the proper application of dashboards requires recognizing their intended purpose and limitations. Dashboards come in 3 primary varieties, each serving a distinct function within an organization. Operational dashboards focus on real-time data monitoring. Think of a manufacturing floor supervisor tracking production metrics throughout the day, or a customer service manager monitoring call volumes and resolution times. These dashboards typically refresh frequently, sometimes as often as every few minutes, providing immediate visibility into current performance. Tactical dashboards, the second category, are designed for tracking performance against specific goals over moderate time periods. Department heads might use these to monitor progress toward quarterly targets, with updates occurring daily or weekly. These dashboards help teams stay aligned with immediate objectives while providing enough historical context to identify short-term trends. The third category, strategic dashboards, delivers a high-level overview of organizational performance for senior leadership. These typically refresh monthly or quarterly and focus on key performance indicators tied to long-term business objectives. Unlike the granular detail found in operational dashboards, strategic versions prioritize broader patterns and significant deviations from expected performance. Understanding these distinctions helps explain why our case study dashboard failed despite its technical excellence. The team likely created a strategic dashboard with operational level detail, overwhelming executives with granularity they neither needed nor had time to process. The dashboard design simply didn't match its intended audience or purpose. So when do dashboards actually excel? First, they're invaluable for regular recurring monitoring of established metrics. Consider an e-commerce platform that needs constant visibility into website traffic, conversion rates, and cart abandonment. A well-designed dashboard allows the digital marketing team to spot unusual patterns within minutes rather than discovering problems after customers have already abandoned the site. A major airline provides an excellent example of effective dashboard implementation. Their operations center uses a real-time dashboard displaying flight delays, weather conditions, crew availability, and maintenance status across their entire network. When winter storms hit the Midwest, operations managers can immediately see cascading impacts across connecting flights and make rapid decisions about cancellations or reroutings, often before passengers even reach the airport. This highlights a crucial characteristic of successful dashboards. They answer specific, predefined questions. The airline dashboard isn't trying to explain why delay patterns emerge or recommending strategic network changes. It simply shows managers exactly what's happening right now so they can respond accordingly. The questions being answered are clear and consistent. Which flights are delayed? Where are bottlenecks forming? What resources are available for recovery? Another environment where dashboards shine is in self-service exploration for users who need ongoing access to standardized metrics. Financial analysts monitoring portfolio performance, quality assurance teams tracking defect rates, or sales managers reviewing territory performance all benefit from having consistent, reliable access to current metrics they can examine independently. The key insight here is that dashboards should be viewed as tools that summarize raw data and frame potential stories rather than as storytelling devices themselves. They help identify key metrics but don't provide the narrative context needed for deeper understanding. As data visualization expert Brent Dykes notes, dashboards are excellent at highlighting what's happening, but typically fall short in explaining why changes are occurring or what actions should be taken. This distinction becomes clearer when we consider the design philosophy behind effective dashboards. Rather than attempting to be persuasive or emotionally engaging, the best dashboards can be described as boring with highlights, presenting a clear, straightforward view of data while emphasizing critical areas that require attention. They maintain consistency in their presentation, allowing users to develop familiarity with the interface and quickly spot changes or anomalies. Consider a supply chain dashboard that monitors inventory levels across multiple warehouses. Most of the time, the dashboard shows green status indicators across the board, reassuring but unremarkable. When one product category suddenly drops below threshold levels, that section turns red. The dashboard's value isn't in telling a compelling story about inventory management philosophy. It's in instantly directing attention to the specific area requiring intervention. This points to another crucial design principle. Dashboard design must align with its intended purpose. A status monitoring dashboard should prioritize immediate visibility of outliers, while an explanatory dashboard might require more context and supporting details. Many dashboard projects fail because they try to serve too many masters, cramming multiple purposes into a single interface and ultimately serving none effectively. When properly implemented, dashboards become automated tools that help users identify anomalies in data, allowing them to focus on insights that require further exploration or action. They serve as filters, separating signal from noise in the vast sea of organizational data. A well-designed dashboard doesn't demand interpretation. It surfaces exceptions that merit attention while maintaining the background visibility needed for context. Now we can articulate when dashboards are truly the right choice. They excel when your audience needs recurring access to standardized metrics and possesses both the time and skill to interpret them. Operational teams monitoring daily performance, specialists tracking specific processes, and analysts exploring standard business metrics all benefit from well-designed dashboards that deliver consistent, reliable data access. But here's where many organizations go wrong. They deploy dashboards for executive decision-making without recognizing that this audience typically lacks either the time or domain-specific knowledge to effectively interpret dashboard data. Executives don't need tools for exploring data. They need clear insights and recommendations derived from that exploration. The criteria for determining whether a dashboard is appropriate for your situation comes down to 4 key questions. First, does your audience need ongoing monitoring rather than one-time decision support? Second, are the questions being answered consistent and predefined rather than exploratory? Third, does your audience have sufficient time and expertise to interpret the visualizations independently? And finally, is the primary goal to track established metrics rather than to drive specific actions? If you answer yes to these questions, a dashboard is likely the right approach. If not, you may need to consider alternative methods of communicating insights, which brings us to data stories. Consider the case of a hospital network that implemented a patient safety dashboard tracking medication errors, patient falls, and other safety indicators across facilities. The dashboard updates hourly, allowing safety officers to identify potential issues immediately. When one hospital showed a sudden spike in medication errors, the dashboard prompted an immediate investigation that revealed a procedural issue with a newly deployed electronic health record system. The problem was corrected before patient harm occurred. A perfect example of dashboards fulfilling their intended monitoring function. This success contrasts sharply with organizations that built elaborate dashboards for quarterly board meetings, expecting busy executives to interpret complex visualizations during brief presentations. The dashboard that excels at continuous monitoring often fails miserably at persuasive, decision-oriented communication. The anatomy of an effective data story. When executives need to make critical decisions, they don't just need numbers, they need meaning. The ancient art of storytelling holds surprisingly powerful applications for modern data analytics. While dashboards excel at monitoring metrics, they often fail at the crucial task of persuasion, translating those metrics into action. Data stories bridge this gap by leveraging psychological frameworks hardwired into human cognition, transforming abstract numbers into meaningful narratives with clear paths to action. Data storytelling isn't a new concept. It's actually one of humanity's oldest communication methods repurposed for the digital age. It represents the intentional presentation of data-driven insights wrapped in a narrative structure specifically designed to drive a particular decision. Unlike dashboards that present information for passive consumption, data stories actively guide the audience toward understanding and action. To understand why this distinction matters, we need to recognize that data storytelling sits at the intersection of 3 crucial elements. As data storytelling expert Brent Dykes emphasizes, effective data stories combine data, narrative structure, and emotional resonance. While dashboards primarily leverage data alone, stories harness all 3 components to create a complete communication package that resonates with how humans naturally process information. The passive-active distinction becomes clearer when we examine how each approach frames information. Dashboards display data and leave interpretation largely to the viewer. They present facts, but rarely weave those facts into a coherent argument. Data stories, on the other hand, deliberately interpret information to highlight specific insights and implications. They don't just show what happened, they explain why it matters and what should be done about it. This persuasive quality makes data stories particularly valuable in decision contexts. When analytics teams need to influence strategic choices rather than simply monitor metrics, narrative becomes essential. Persuasion requires more than accurate data. It requires context, meaning, and emotional engagement, all of which stories provide naturally. The structure of effective data stories follows a time-tested formula that has remained remarkably consistent across cultures and throughout human history. An effective data story incorporates several essential components that work together to create a compelling case for action. First, data stories establish context, grounding the audience in the current situation and explaining why they should care. This might involve describing market conditions, competitive pressures, or organizational goals that make the forthcoming information relevant. Context creates the foundation for understanding by answering the question, why should I pay attention to this? Once context is established, the narrative introduces a conflict or opportunity, the central tension that drives the story forward. In business analytics, this typically manifests as a problem to be solved, an opportunity to be seized, or a decision to be made. Perhaps customer acquisition costs are rising unexpectedly, or a new product segment shows unusual growth potential. This element creates the narrative tension that captures and maintains audience attention. With the audience engaged, the story then supports its central premise with carefully selected evidence. This is where quantitative data plays a starring role, but with an important distinction from dashboard presentations. The data is curated and contextualized rather than comprehensive. Instead of showing all available metrics, an effective data story selectively presents evidence that illuminates the central conflict or opportunity organized to build a logical case. Finally, the narrative resolves with clear recommendations, specific actions the audience should take based on the presented evidence. This element transforms the story from interesting information into actionable intelligence. Without this component, data stories risk becoming mere reports rather than decision catalysts. What makes data stories particularly powerful is their ability to create emotional connections with audiences. This might seem counterintuitive in the data-driven business world, but emotion plays a crucial role in decision-making at all levels. Data stories create these connections by relating abstract metrics to tangible business goals and priorities that matter to the audience. For example, rather than simply presenting declining customer satisfaction scores as raw numbers, a data story might frame this metric in terms of its impact on retention, revenue, and competitive position, all priorities that resonate emotionally with business leaders. As Brent Dykes notes, this emotional connection helps make insights more relatable and impactful for decision makers who must often choose between competing priorities with incomplete information. The integration of quantitative and qualitative elements further strengthens data stories. While quantitative data provides objective evidence, qualitative context helps audiences understand the human dimensions behind the numbers. This might include customer testimonials, employee feedback, or market observations that explain why metrics are changing in particular ways. By combining these elements, data stories provide a more complete picture than either could deliver alone. An often overlooked aspect of effective data storytelling is the narrative arc, the progression of information that builds toward a specific conclusion. Rather than presenting insights as disconnected observations, data stories connect these points to construct a coherent argument that feels inevitable by its conclusion. The arc should guide the audience through a logical progression, from context to problem identification, to evidence examination, to recommendation. This structure mirrors how humans naturally process information and make decisions. We don't typically make choices based on isolated data points. Instead, we integrate information into coherent narratives that help us understand cause and effect. By aligning with this natural cognitive process, data stories become more persuasive than dashboards alone could ever be. The narrative arc also serves a practical purpose by building toward a specific call to action. Each element in the story should contribute to making the final recommendation feel not just reasonable but necessary. When done effectively, the audience reaches the conclusion alongside the presenter, having been guided through the same logical journey. While dashboards can highlight observations in data, they frequently fail to provide the deeper insights that require narrative context to explain significance. As Brent Dykes observes, dashboards excel at showing what's happening, but typically lack the narrative framework needed to explain why changes are occurring or what should be done in response. Consider how this plays out in practice. A sales dashboard might accurately display declining performance in a particular region, but it can't explain the competitive pressures causing the decline or recommend specific interventions to address the problem. A data story, by contrast, would integrate this quantitative observation with qualitative context about market conditions, competitive moves, and customer feedback to create a comprehensive understanding of both the problem and potential solutions. This distinction becomes particularly important when analytics teams need to influence strategic decisions rather than simply monitor performance. In these scenarios, data stories provide a much more effective communication vehicle because they're fundamentally persuasive tools designed to drive specific decisions. They don't just inform, they influence. The persuasive power of data stories derives from their ability to create what psychologists call narrative transportation, the experience of being mentally immersed in a story. When audiences enter this state, they become more receptive to the embedded message and less likely to counter-argue against presented evidence. This psychological phenomenon explains why stories have been used throughout human history to share important information and influence behavior. For modern data professionals, narrative transportation offers a powerful tool for overcoming the natural resistance to change that many organizations exhibit. By engaging both rational and emotional processing systems, data stories can help overcome organizational inertia and drive action where dashboards alone would fail to create sufficient momentum. Looking beyond individual stories, organizations that master data storytelling often develop a broader narrative intelligence. The ability to identify which insights deserve to be elevated into stories and how to craft those stories for maximum impact. This skill becomes increasingly valuable as organizations face more complex decisions with higher stakes and greater uncertainty. Data stories also serve another critical function that dashboards rarely achieve. They create shared understanding across diverse stakeholders. When different departments view the same dashboard, they often draw different conclusions based on their unique perspectives and priorities. A well-crafted data story, however, guides all viewers toward a common understanding by explicitly connecting data to business context and implications. This ability to create alignment makes data stories particularly valuable for cross-functional decision-making, where stakeholders with different expertise and priorities must reach consensus. By providing a common narrative framework, data stories help diverse teams develop shared mental models of problems and solutions. As we've examined the anatomy of effective data stories, several principles have emerged that distinguish them from other forms of data communication. Data stories are selective rather than exhaustive, emphasizing the most relevant insights rather than presenting all available information. They are interpretive rather than neutral, offering a clear perspective on what the data means. And they're action-oriented rather than observational, designed specifically to drive decisions rather than simply inform. These characteristics make data stories fundamentally different tools than dashboards, with different purposes and contexts where they excel. Understanding these differences is essential for analytics professionals seeking to maximize their impact on organizational decision-making. The 5-minute decision framework, dashboard or data story. The theoretical distinction between dashboards and data stories becomes immediately practical when you're staring at a blank screen with stakeholder expectations looming. Most analytics professionals waste precious hours deliberating over their approach when a structured decision process could point them in the right direction within minutes. I'm about to share a decision framework that will eliminate this guesswork, rather than relying on intuition or defaulting to whatever worked last time. This systematic approach diagnoses the right communication vehicle based on the specific context of your project. Analytics professionals face immense pressure when determining how to present their findings. On one hand, there's the expectation to deliver sophisticated visualizations that demonstrate technical prowess. On the other, there's the fundamental need to drive decisions and actions. This tension creates anxiety, especially when guidance is limited to vague advice like know your audience without concrete criteria for making these choices. According to the research, many analytics experts recognize this challenge. Dykes introduces the concept of an insight funnel, noting that dashboards can help frame a story by highlighting key metrics, but they don't necessarily tell the story themselves. The journey from observation to insight frequently demands analysis beyond what dashboards provide. This disconnection between tool and purpose is the root of countless failed analytics projects. Nick Debra points out that many dashboards fall short because they don't effectively communicate whether everything is functioning properly or if something requires attention. They often assume users possess detailed background knowledge of the displayed metrics, an assumption that rarely matches reality. Our framework addresses this problem through 4 critical decision points that diagnose whether a dashboard or data story is appropriate for your specific situation. Let's walk through them one by one. The first and most fundamental question is this for ongoing monitoring or a specific decision? This distinction forms the foundation of your approach. Monitoring scenarios typically benefit from dashboards, while specific decisions often require data stories. Consider a marketing team tracking campaign performance across channels. If they need regular visibility into metrics like click-through rates, conversion rates, and cost per acquisition, with the ability to check these metrics at any time, a dashboard is likely the appropriate solution. The purpose here is continuous awareness rather than driving a particular decision. In contrast, if the marketing director needs to determine whether to reallocate budget from underperforming channels to high-performing ones, a data story would be more effective. It would outline the current performance discrepancies, explain why they're occurring, and recommend specific actions with projected outcomes. This highlights a crucial insight from the research. Many stakeholders use the term dashboard as shorthand for any data display. As Andy Krakow mentions, clients often request dashboards when they actually need something else entirely. This communication gap leads to misalignment between the analytics product and the audience's actual needs. The second decision point digs deeper. Does your audience have time and ability to explore data, or do they need direct insights? This question examines both the audience's analytical skills and their time constraints. Sarah Bartlett emphasizes the importance of understanding stakeholder needs when creating dashboards. She notes that leaders frequently request dashboards without clearly articulating how they plan to use the information, creating a disconnect between design and purpose. If your audience consists of data-savvy analysts with dedicated time for exploration, a well-designed dashboard empowers them to discover insights independently. These users appreciate the freedom to investigate different angles and test their own hypotheses. However, if your audience includes busy executives managing packed schedules between critical meetings, they typically lack both the time and inclination to explore raw data. For these stakeholders, a concise data story that delivers pre-packaged insights with clear implications proves far more valuable than an exploratory tool, no matter how sophisticated. The third decision point examines the nature of the data itself. Is the data showing expected patterns or unexpected findings? This criterion recognizes that familiar patterns and anomalies demand different communication approaches. When data follows expected patterns, trends that align with forecasts or historical performance, dashboards excel at confirming these patterns efficiently. Users can quickly verify that metrics remain within acceptable parameters without the need for extensive explanation. However, when data reveals unexpected findings, surprising trends, anomalies, or concerning deviations, a data story becomes essential. These situations require context to explain why the deviation occurred, what factors contributed to it, and most importantly, what actions should be taken in response. Deborah suggests that analysts need to segment dashboards into different types based on their functions. Status monitoring dashboards serve a different purpose than persuasive dashboards designed to drive specific actions. This distinction reinforces our third decision point. Expected patterns benefit from monitoring dashboards, while unexpected findings often require a more persuasive approach. The fourth decision point addresses urgency and complexity. Does this require immediate action or contextual awareness? This final criterion examines both the time frame for decision-making and the depth of understanding required. When immediate action is needed, such as responding to a sudden drop in website conversion rates or addressing a production line failure, dashboards with alert mechanisms often serve as the first line of response. These tools highlight critical issues requiring immediate attention and provide the essential information needed for rapid intervention. Conversely, when a situation demands contextual awareness, understanding the broader implications, considering multiple factors, or navigating complex trade-offs, a data story provides the necessary depth. These scenarios benefit from narrative explanation that connects disparate data points into a coherent picture, helping stakeholders grasp the full complexity before making decisions. Dykes argues that well-designed dashboards should generate questions and observations that lead to deeper insights, which can then be communicated through data stories. This highlights the complementary relationship between these tools. Dashboards often identify issues that data stories then explain. By working through these 4 decision points, you can diagnose the appropriate communication approach for your specific analytics scenario in under 5 minutes. Rather than agonizing over your choice or defaulting to your comfort zone, This framework provides clear guidance based on audience needs and decision context. Let's apply this framework to a real scenario. Imagine you're analyzing customer satisfaction data for a software company. The quarterly Net Promoter Score has declined from 42 to 38, and your stakeholders want to understand what's happening. First decision point. Is this for ongoing monitoring or a specific decision? Since leadership needs to determine whether to implement corrective actions based on this decline, this represents a specific decision scenario leaning toward a data story. Second decision point. Does your audience have time, ability to explore, or need direct insights? If you're presenting to busy executives with limited analytical background, they'll need direct insights rather than exploratory tools, further supporting a data story approach. Third decision point. Is the data showing expected patterns or unexpected findings? The decline represents an unexpected finding that requires explanation, again pointing toward a data story. Fourth decision point. Does this require immediate action or contextual awareness? Understanding the factors behind declining satisfaction requires contextual awareness of multiple contributing elements, solidifying the case for a data story. In this scenario, all 4 decision points direct you toward creating a data story rather than a dashboard. Your story might explain which customer segments experienced the greatest satisfaction decline, identify the primary drivers of dissatisfaction, and recommend specific interventions to address these issues. The beauty of this framework lies in its balance between structure and flexibility. It provides clear guidance without being overly prescriptive, allowing you to adapt to the nuances of your specific situation while maintaining a systematic approach. Importantly, this framework shifts the focus from the data itself to the context in which it will be used. Many analytics professionals become so immersed in their data that they lose sight of the ultimate purpose, enabling better decisions. By centering the decision framework on audience needs and decision context, we realign analytics efforts with their fundamental purpose. The insight funnel concept that Dykes introduces reminds us that dashboards and data stories serve complementary functions in the analytics ecosystem. Dashboards help frame potential stories by isolating key metrics and highlighting areas worthy of investigation. Data stories then take those observations and transform them into insights with clear implications for action. In practice, you'll likely find that many situations fall somewhere between these extremes or require elements of both approaches. The framework isn't meant to create a rigid binary choice, but rather to guide your thinking toward the most appropriate primary approach for your specific context. By applying this framework consistently, you'll develop better instincts for matching your communication approach to stakeholder needs. Over time, you'll recognize patterns in how different stakeholders and decision types respond to various presentation formats, allowing you to refine your approach further. Stakeholder analysis. Who needs what and when? Now that you have a decision framework, let's address the elephant in the data room. Organizational hierarchy fundamentally changes how information is consumed. Ever wonder why the dashboard that impressed your analytical colleagues left executive leadership completely unmoved? The answer lies not in your data quality, but in something far more predictable, the organizational chart. Understanding how different stakeholders interact with data isn't just a nice-to-have skill, it's essential for ensuring your insights actually drive decision-making. When we examine organizational structures, we discover that data consumption patterns follow remarkably consistent trends based on role and responsibility level. Think about your organization's leadership structure. The CEO, CFO, and other C-suite executives operate in a fundamentally different information environment than operational managers. This isn't merely about preferences. It reflects their distinct decision contexts, time constraints, and strategic priorities. Let's start with executives. These stakeholders typically require data stories for strategic decisions because their focus extends across the entire organization. They need insights that connect to broader business narratives rather than isolated metrics. An executive's typical day involves numerous high-stakes decisions across multiple business areas, leaving minimal time for data exploration. When presenting to executives, consider that their decision-making often centers on resource allocation, long-term strategy, and organizational direction. They need clear, concise narratives that highlight implications and provide explicit recommendations. The question they're silently asking is, what does this mean for our business objectives, and what action should we take? I've observed countless presentations where analysts bombard executives with detailed data visualizations when what they truly needed was a concise data story with clear business implications. This misalignment wastes both parties' time and undermines the analyst's credibility. In contrast, operational managers inhabit a completely different data world. These stakeholders often need dashboards for daily monitoring and tactical adjustments. Their responsibility centers on implementing strategy and ensuring smooth operations within their specific domain. They need quick access to key performance indicators and operational metrics that help them identify issues before they escalate. Operational managers typically have deeper domain expertise in their specific area than executives. They understand the nuances of their processes and can interpret specialized metrics without extensive explanation. What they need is timely, relevant information that helps them maintain operational excellence and make course corrections. For example, a logistics manager needs to monitor shipment volumes, delivery times, and freight costs throughout the day. A well-designed dashboard empowers them to spot anomalies and take corrective action immediately. Attempting to replace this with periodic data stories would actually diminish their effectiveness by creating information gaps between reports. Then we have analysts and specialists who frequently require both dashboards and data stories, depending on the context. These stakeholders often serve as information intermediaries, translating raw data into actionable insights for decision makers. They need comprehensive tools for exploration and analysis, but also need to develop storytelling skills to communicate findings effectively. This leads us to an important insight. Data communication should be tailored not just to the individual, but to their role within the organization. A stakeholder matrix can help clarify these different needs across your organization, ensuring that your data communication matches audience requirements. Imagine a simple two-axis matrix. The vertical axis represents organizational level, from specialists to executives. The horizontal axis represents decision frequency, from frequent operational decisions to infrequent strategic ones. As you move up and right on this matrix, stakeholders increasingly need data stories over dashboards. At the bottom left, operational specialists making frequent tactical decisions benefit most from real-time dashboards. At the top right, executives making infrequent strategic decisions need comprehensive data stories. The middle contains roles that benefit from both approaches, depending on the specific decision context. This pattern reveals something crucial about effective data communication. It's not about the data itself, but about matching the format to the audience's role and decision context. When analysts ignore this principle, even brilliant analyses can fail to gain traction. As one expert aptly put it, designing a presentation without knowing your audience is like writing a love letter and addressing it to whom it may concern. This quote perfectly captures the problem with one-size-fits-all approaches to data communication. The stakeholder matrix also helps explain why cross-functional communication can be challenging. When an analyst accustomed to working with other data specialists presents to executives, they often default to dashboard-style presentations filled with detailed metrics. Meanwhile, the executives are wondering, so what? What does this mean for our business? Effective stakeholder management involves mapping your communication approach to specific roles and decision contexts. This dramatically increases the likelihood that your insights will drive action. Let's look at how this works in practice. When communicating with executives about quarterly performance, a data story that highlights key variances, explains their causes, and offers recommendations will be far more effective than a detailed dashboard. For operational managers tracking daily production metrics, a well-designed dashboard with alert capabilities will serve their needs better than periodic data stories. This doesn't mean you need completely separate systems for different stakeholders. Often, the same underlying data can power both dashboards and data stories. The difference lies in how you package and present that information for different audiences. One effective approach is to develop a stakeholder communication plan that maps key decision makers to their preferred information formats. This plan should identify 1. Each stakeholder's role and decision responsibilities, 2. Their typical information needs and time constraints, 3. Their analytical sophistication and domain expertise, 4. The decision frequency and impact level, 5. The most appropriate communication approach, dashboard, data story, or hybrid. By systematically analyzing these factors, you can develop a tailored communication strategy that maximizes the impact of your analytics efforts. This approach also helps prioritize your analytics work. Not all stakeholders have equal influence on the decisions you're trying to inform. By identifying the most critical decision makers for each analytics initiative, you can ensure your communication approach aligns with their needs. The stakeholder analysis reveals another important insight. Data communication preferences aren't random or purely personal. They follow predictable patterns based on organizational role. This means you can develop templates and frameworks for different stakeholder types rather than starting from scratch each time. For instance, executive-level communications typically benefit from opening with the business implication or recommendation, supporting key points with selective relevant data, providing explicit context, linking insights to strategic priorities, offering clear, actionable recommendations, keeping technical details in an appendix for reference. Meanwhile, operational communications often require real-time or near real-time data updates, clear status indicators and alerts, ability to drill into specific areas of concern, historical context for performance metrics, clear thresholds indicating when action is needed. By recognizing these patterns, you can develop your data communication skills in a systematic way, building expertise in matching approaches to audience needs. This stakeholder-centered approach also improves collaboration between data teams and business units. When data professionals show they understand the specific needs of different roles, they build credibility and trust. Business stakeholders, in turn, become more engaged in the analytics process when they see information presented in ways that directly support their decision-making. The ultimate goal of stakeholder analysis isn't just better presentations, it's better decisions. When data insights are communicated in formats aligned with stakeholder needs, they're more likely to be understood, trusted, and acted upon. The hybrid approach: when and how to combine methods. Beyond matching formats to stakeholders lies a more powerful approach that many organizations overlook. What if the choice between dashboards and data stories isn't actually a choice at all, but rather two complementary tools that work best in tandem? The most sophisticated data teams have discovered that these approaches aren't competitors. They're collaborators in an integrated system of insight generation and communication. This hybrid approach doesn't just double your options, it creates something entirely new. Think of it as a continuous insight pipeline where monitoring and storytelling constantly inform and enhance each other. Rather than seeing these as separate tracks, forward-thinking organizations are building integrated workflows where dashboards identify opportunities that stories can explain, while compelling narratives justify investments in more sophisticated monitoring systems. But here's the challenge. Implementing both approaches simultaneously stretches already thin resources. Data teams often struggle with capacity constraints. They're under pressure to produce more insights with limited headcount while facing growing demands from stakeholders across the organization. When you're already struggling to keep up with dashboard maintenance or presentation requests, the idea of building an entirely new parallel workflow can seem overwhelming. The key is understanding that a hybrid approach isn't about doubling your workload, it's about creating strategic connections between workflows you likely already have. The first of these connections is what I call the dashboard-to-story pipeline, and it fundamentally changes how insights are discovered. In this workflow, dashboards serve as what one expert calls automated oyster shuckers, tools that efficiently process large volumes of data to identify the pearls worth examining more closely. When designed properly, dashboards flag significant changes in metrics, creating natural starting points for deeper investigation. For instance, a sudden drop in conversion rates might trigger an alert, prompting an analyst to investigate the underlying causes and craft a narrative explaining the change and recommending corrective action. This approach transforms dashboard anomalies into story opportunities. Instead of presenting stakeholders with the raw dashboard view that triggered your investigation, you can deliver a focused narrative that presents the complete picture: what changed, why it matters, what caused it, and what actions should be taken. This process effectively addresses one of the fundamental limitations of dashboards: their inability to explain the why behind the what. As Dykes notes in the research, dashboards can generate questions and observations that lead to insights, which can then be communicated through data stories. This two-step process allows organizations to leverage both dashboards for monitoring and storytelling for persuasion and action. The dashboard becomes the discovery mechanism, while the story becomes the communication vehicle. The second crucial connection is the story-to-dashboard flow, which reverses this relationship. In this approach, data stories serve as the catalyst for dashboard creation and refinement. When you present a compelling data story about a critical business issue, you often generate ongoing interest in monitoring related metrics. This creates the perfect opportunity to propose a dedicated dashboard focused on those specific concerns. For example, imagine presenting a data story about customer churn patterns that reveals alarming trends in specific segments. The resulting executive interest provides the perfect justification for developing an ongoing churn monitoring dashboard. The story creates the urgency and buy-in necessary to invest in more sophisticated monitoring tools. Without the initial narrative to demonstrate value, the dashboard proposal might languish in the project queue indefinitely. This approach is particularly valuable for securing resources for dashboard development. By proving the value of specific metrics through a compelling narrative, you can justify the time and expense required to build more robust monitoring systems. The story becomes a proof of concept that demonstrates the business value of ongoing measurement. A third integration technique involves embedding narrative elements directly within dashboard interfaces, what I call narrative-enhanced dashboards. This approach recognizes that even monitoring tools benefit from contextual elements that help users interpret what they're seeing. Nick Debra points out that many dashboards fall short because they don't effectively communicate whether metrics indicate normal operation or require attention. By incorporating narrative elements like annotations, interpretive text, and recommended actions, dashboards can become more independently valuable while still serving their primary monitoring function. Consider how different a dashboard experience becomes when metrics are accompanied by brief contextual explanations. Instead of simply showing that website traffic decreased by 15%, a narrative-enhanced dashboard might note, traffic dropped 15% following the site migration, which was anticipated and remains within acceptable parameters for this phase of the transition. No action required. Such enhancements transform dashboards from passive monitoring tools into active decision support systems that guide users toward appropriate responses without requiring separate communications. This approach is particularly valuable for operational teams who need both real-time monitoring and interpretive guidance. Amanda McCulloch emphasizes this need for clarity in her research observations. She notes that clients often request dashboards without fully articulating their requirements, leading to ineffective communication. By incorporating narrative elements, dashboards can better meet diverse audience needs and clarify the significance of the data being presented. Implementing a hybrid approach requires careful coordination across teams with different skill sets. The research highlights the importance of having both technical specialists who can build robust data infrastructure and communication professionals who can translate complex insights into compelling narratives. This collaboration enhances the effectiveness of both dashboards and storytelling. A telecommunications company provides a practical example of hybrid implementation. Their network operations team maintains real-time performance dashboards that monitor service quality metrics across their infrastructure. When these dashboards detect persistent performance issues in specific regions, they trigger an investigation process that results in a detailed analysis report. This report includes not just technical details, but a narrative explaining the business impact, such as potential revenue loss from customer dissatisfaction, along with specific recommendations for infrastructure investments. This structured workflow ensures that executive-level decisions are always informed by both the raw monitoring capabilities of dashboards and the contextual understanding provided by data stories. The result is faster, better informed decision-making that connects technical metrics directly to business outcomes. Financial services firms have similarly developed hybrid approaches for risk management. One major bank uses a comprehensive risk dashboard that monitors thousands of transactions for potential fraud indicators. When the system identifies suspicious patterns, it automatically generates alerts that trigger a structured investigation process. The findings are then presented to compliance officers as focused data stories that explain the pattern, assess the threat level, and recommend specific actions. This approach allows the bank to efficiently monitor massive transaction volumes while ensuring that human attention is focused only on the most significant anomalies. The dashboard handles the heavy lifting of continuous monitoring, while the narrative format ensures that complex patterns are properly contextualized and explained. Healthcare organizations have pioneered another variation of the hybrid approach through what they call dashboard rounds. In this workflow, clinical teams gather regularly to review key performance dashboards tracking patient outcomes, then collaborate to develop narrative explanations for concerning trends. These narratives become the basis for improvement initiatives, which are then monitored through the same dashboards in a continuous improvement cycle. This integration of monitoring and storytelling creates a virtuous cycle where better stories lead to better dashboards, and better dashboards lead to better stories. Rather than treating these as competing approaches, organizations can create workflows where each strengthens the other. The most sophisticated implementation of the hybrid approach involves creating formal workflows that connect these tools systematically. This might include 1. Establishing alert thresholds on key dashboards that automatically trigger analysis and storytelling workflows. 2. Creating templates that transform dashboard data into story formats with minimal effort. 3. Implementing feedback mechanisms that capture questions from story presentations to refine future dashboard design. 4. Developing modular story components that can be rapidly assembled when dashboards identify significant changes. 5. Building shared data definitions and calculation methods that ensure consistency across both formats. The research emphasizes the necessity of a shared language when discussing dashboards and data stories. By defining terms clearly, teams can better align their efforts and create effective communication tools that integrate both approaches. This common understanding ensures that everyone involved, from data analysts to executives, has the same expectations about what each tool should provide. These integrated systems don't just improve efficiency, they fundamentally transform how organizations derive value from data. Rather than producing insights in isolation, the hybrid approach creates a continuous insight generation system where monitoring identifies opportunities and storytelling drives action. The result is a more responsive, adaptable analytics function that consistently delivers actionable intelligence. To implement this approach in your organization, start by mapping your current workflows. Identify where dashboards are already generating questions that could benefit from narrative treatment and where compelling stories have created interest in ongoing monitoring. Look for natural connection points where these processes could feed into each other more systematically. Then create formalized handoffs between these functions. This might involve regular reviews of dashboard anomalies to identify story opportunities or processes for translating successful presentations into monitoring requirements. The goal is to create clear pathways for insights to flow between these complementary approaches. Case study: how switching approaches increased ROI by 40%. What separates data initiatives that fail from those that transform organizations? For one healthcare provider, the difference between abandoning their analytics program and achieving a 40% ROI increase came down to a fundamental reconsideration of how they communicated with data. Imagine investing millions in cutting-edge analytics infrastructure, hiring top talent, and implementing state-of-the-art visualization tools, only to watch your entire program teeter on the brink of cancellation. This was the reality for a major healthcare organization that had spent years building what they believed would be a game-changing analytics capability. Despite substantial financial commitments and executive sponsorship, their data adoption rates were plummeting, and stakeholders were increasingly questioning the value of their analytics investments. "We were at a crisis point," recalled the organization's chief analytics officer. "Our leadership team was seriously considering pulling the plug on years of analytics investment because they couldn't see any tangible return. We had 2 quarters to demonstrate real value or face a complete program shutdown." The organization's analytics team had focused almost exclusively on dashboard creation. They built an impressive array of visualizations covering everything from patient outcomes and operational efficiency to financial performance and regulatory compliance. Their technical implementation was flawless, beautiful visuals, reliable data pipelines, and thoughtful UX design. Yet despite this technical excellence, clinicians rarely consulted the dashboards. Administrators made decisions without referencing the available data, and executives grew increasingly frustrated with the apparent waste of resources. What made this situation particularly alarming was that healthcare organizations typically operate on thin margins, making any significant technology investment a carefully scrutinized expense. With limited resources and mounting pressure to improve patient care while controlling costs, the organization couldn't justify continuing to fund a data program that wasn't demonstrably improving decisions or outcomes. The analytics team conducted an urgent internal review to understand what was happening. Through stakeholder interviews and usage analysis, they uncovered a critical insight. Their one-size-fits-all approach to data communication was fundamentally misaligned with how different stakeholders actually made decisions. Clinicians reported feeling overwhelmed by the sheer volume of metrics presented in the dashboards. "I'm trying to care for patients, not spend my day interpreting graphs," said one department head. Administrators complained that while the dashboard showed current performance, they didn't provide context for why metrics were changing or what actions should be considered. And executives found themselves drowning in detailed visualizations when what they needed were clear, actionable insights tied to strategic priorities. Rather than simply creating more dashboards or refining their existing ones, the team made a bold decision to completely reimagine their approach to analytics communication. They adopted a framework remarkably similar to the one we discussed earlier, analyzing each data communication need based on audience, decision context, and information purpose. The transformation began with a comprehensive audit of every existing dashboard, evaluating each against clear criteria. Was it being used regularly? Did it support specific decisions? Was it aligned with the information consumption patterns of its intended audience? This ruthless assessment led them to retire nearly 60% of their dashboards, which were either redundant or underutilized. For the dashboards they maintained, the team completely redesigned them with specific use cases in mind. For instance, nursing unit managers received streamlined operational dashboards focused exclusively on staffing metrics, patient flow, and quality indicators that required daily monitoring. These dashboards were purpose-built for regular checking during shift changes, with clear visual alerts that highlighted deviations requiring immediate attention. Meanwhile, infection control specialists received highly specialized dashboards tracking potential outbreaks across facilities, with automated alerting when certain thresholds were crossed. These dashboards were designed for continuous monitoring rather than occasional reference, serving as an early warning system that triggered standardized protocols when concerning patterns emerged. But the most significant change was the introduction of a formal data storytelling practice. Rather than expecting busy clinicians and executives to extract insights from dashboards, the analytics team began creating targeted data stories focused on specific decisions and strategic priorities. For example, when analyzing surgical outcomes across different facilities, they abandoned their previous approach of simply updating a comprehensive surgical metrics dashboard. Instead, they created a compelling narrative presentation that identified specific procedures showing unusual variation in outcomes, highlighted the underlying factors driving these differences, and presented clear recommendations for standardizing best practices across facilities. The response was immediate and dramatic, explained the lead data scientist. The same surgical chiefs who never opened the dashboard were now actively engaged in the conversation, asking questions and volunteering context that enriched our understanding of the data. Within 3 weeks, they had implemented procedural changes that measurably improved patient outcomes. This wasn't an isolated success. The team established clear criteria for when to create data stories versus when to rely on dashboards. Time-critical operational decisions requiring frequent monitoring remained dashboard-centered. Strategic decisions with significant financial or patient care implications received data stories with clear narratives and recommendations, and they created formalized handoffs between these approaches, with dashboard anomalies triggering deeper investigations that often resulted in data stories presented to leadership. One particularly effective example involved patient readmissions. Hospital readmissions within 30 days of discharge not only impact patient experience but also carry significant financial penalties from Medicare. The organization had maintained a comprehensive readmissions dashboard for years, but it wasn't driving meaningful improvement. The analytics team restructured their approach entirely. The existing dashboard was streamlined to focus specifically on near real-time monitoring of readmission rates by unit and diagnosis. This operational dashboard was used by unit managers and case managers to identify immediate issues requiring intervention. However, when the dashboard revealed an unusual pattern of readmissions among congestive heart failure patients, the team didn't simply flag the anomaly and move on. They launched a targeted investigation that combined quantitative analysis with qualitative research, including patient interviews and clinical record reviews. This investigation became a data story presented to the cardiovascular service line leadership. Rather than overwhelming them with metrics, the team crafted a narrative that identified specific discharge instruction issues that were leading to medication adherence problems. They concluded with 3 concrete recommendations for process improvements, complete with implementation timelines and expected impact. The cardiovascular leadership immediately approved the recommended changes, leading to a 22% reduction in heart failure readmissions within the first quarter of implementation. This single improvement not only enhanced patient care but also avoided an estimated $1.2 million in Medicare penalties annually. What made this transformation particularly remarkable was how it changed the perception of the analytics function within the organization. Previously viewed as a technical support function that produced visualizations, the analytics team was now seen as a strategic partner delivering actionable insights that directly impacted patient care and financial performance. This shift was reflected in the organization's decision-making processes. Rather than making major decisions and then asking for supporting data, leadership began including analytics team members in planning discussions from the outset. The questions changed from, can you build a dashboard for this, to, what does the data tell us about the best approach here? The CEO later reflected, what changed wasn't our data. We had good data all along. What changed was how that data was communicated to us. Instead of drowning in visualization, we started receiving insights we could actually use to make better decisions. The measured impact was substantial. Within 6 months of implementing this hybrid approach, the organization documented a 40% increase in ROI from their analytics investments. This calculation considered both the direct cost savings from specific interventions and the organizational efficiency gains from more focused data communication. Perhaps most tellingly, the same executive leadership that had been considering shutting down the analytics program entirely became its most vocal champions. They approved additional investments in analytics capabilities, but with a crucial difference. The focus shifted from acquiring more technology to developing the team's data storytelling capabilities through dedicated training and coaching. The transformation wasn't without challenges. Some data analysts resisted the shift away from dashboard creation, viewing storytelling as somehow less technical or rigorous than visualization development. Others struggled with the subjective aspects of narrative development, preferring the perceived objectivity of simply presenting data without interpretation. To address these concerns, the organization developed clear guidelines for both dashboards and data stories, establishing quality standards for each approach. They created formal review processes for data stories to ensure analytical rigor while still allowing for interpretive insights and recommendations. And they revised performance metrics for the analytics team to balance technical excellence with communication effectiveness and business impact. The key insight from this healthcare organization's journey was the recognition that effective data communication isn't about choosing between dashboards and data stories. It's about strategically deploying both approaches based on audience needs and decision contexts. By matching their communication method to the specific requirements of each situation, they transformed data from a cost center into a strategic asset, driving measurable improvements in both patient care and financial performance. So, as we wrap up, remember that choosing between dashboards and data stories isn't about which one is better. It's about which one fits your specific situation. Consider your audience needs, the decision context, and the core purpose of your information. This week, I challenge you to audit one of your current data projects. Apply our decision framework and determine if you've chosen the right approach for your stakeholders and their needs. You might be surprised by what you discover. The data landscape continues to evolve, and with it, our communication methods must adapt. The most valuable analysts today aren't just those with impressive technical skills. They're the ones who can effectively match the right communication approach to each situation, understanding what their audience truly needs. As data professionals evolve, they must become skilled not only in analysis but in crafting narratives that effectively communicate insights and drive decision-making.